Greetings, Internet, and welcome to the Comic Watchers Show. We are back for more fun, nerdy, sexy, good times. I'm your host, Matt Meyer. With me, as always, the one and only Nicholas Osborne. Professor Cody White is jumping in, and we have Chad Burdett joining us for only the second time ever, but we needed a bearded Muppet-esque nerd to fill the Mike Eakins shaped void in our lives. So we called upon Chad, and he was like, I can be that Muppet. So our guest.
And you booked me, so I'm and I have
you're the man.
I got a little beard.
Our guest returning to the show, Mr. Steve Orlando. He's here to talk about Project Patron, Commanders in Crisis, and so much more. So, Steve, what's up, buddy? Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back, confounded by StreamYard again, but excited to talk to all of you guys. You'll see me like it's not that I'm vain. I just literally don't know how to move in reverse. No, it's like so much has happened since the last time we talked. I think I probably promised that there was a lot coming out, and some of it's been announced and some of it hasn't even been announced yet, So like it's we're kind of all the way there. I know we announced the stuff you talked about is on the shelves, but we also announced the young adult book that I'm doing that's launching a young adult line for Aftershock, which I'm writing with Steve Fox. I've been busy. I've been real busy.
You stay busy, my dude.
Do what?
You stay busy.
I mean, that's the hustle, Like I've been telling people since I went off exclusive, I'm probably 3 times as busy, but everything, in order to sort of maintain the same overall lifestyle. But it's all stuff that's fresh. It's all stuff that's different. And it's all stuff that's exciting. So it's been really, really cool. It's been it's like a creative perpetual motion machine. And I don't really know what a vacation is. I might try that for a week this summer, but there's a lot of cool shit coming out. So it's a pretty exciting moment for me, and hopefully will be for you folks when it all hits.
Yeah, totally. Let's just jump right in with Project Patron from Aftershock. So, pretty cool concept. If you're not familiar with it, listeners, basically the Patron, a superhero of some renown, died 30 years ago fighting a creature called Woe, who was so mighty it killed the dinosaurs. Very bad dude. Not dissimilar to the death of Superman. However, this guy did not come back, but the world thinks he did. And he's got a Reploid of him that is piloted by a secret clandestine UN-sanctioned group of operatives. Tell us about where Project Patron came from, because I love it, to be honest with you.
I mean, I appreciate it. A lot of my originals come from, essentially. It's either about combining sort of aesthetics that I think are interesting together, or just, sort of holes that I see that could be filled in stories that haven't been told. And obviously, being someone who grew up in the 90s, the late 80s and the 90s, Death of Superman was huge for me. It's actually one of the first From the Racks comics my father ever brought home. I was talking about this earlier today with someone. I've been reading comics since probably like 1987, when I was just like pawing and drooling on them. But there were no comic shops outside of Syracuse where I lived at that time. So it was all shit I was pulling at like the flea market and stuff like that. And then we got a Walden Books in the 90s. And so stuff like Death of Superman would start to come home. Stuff like the Clone Saga. So in some ways, it's kind of fascinating that I didn't jump right off board. Clone Saga, man, I did not understand at the time what a thing that was. Still wonder when Spider-Side's going to come back. But Project Patron was one of those ideas, the moment is so indelible, both, in the comics world and in the mainstream. It's still one of the best-selling comics ever. And so why can't we take a critical lens to that and sort of talk about it in a new way and combine that with an aesthetic that when I started putting this book together was very in my mind. I had just started rewatching original Mobile Suit Gundam. I just started watching the recent release of Evangelion on Netflix. And so I loved that, I love especially that Evangelion was, it was like a mech book, but not mech show, but not really. It's actually about anything but that. It's about these tired, beaten up, conflicted people with intense personal issues And that's what I wanted to do with something that would hit right home in the sweet spot for comic readers. So that was kind of the original pitch for Project Patron. It was Evangelion with a Superman robot. And obviously it evolved from there, but that was the impetus. As most good ideas in my life, it came to me on the treadmill when I was trying to distract myself from how much I hate being on the treadmill.
Who doesn't hate being on the treadmill?
Wonderful.
50,
Right?
50,
Like even people that run all the time, I hate to run. You know, that's my thing. But Nick, Cody, Chad, feel free to jump in, guys.
No, I cannot believe that Evangelion came up as an inspiration for this project. Super exciting just to know that that's kind of still influencing stories, and there's been a lot of prominence with that kind of coming into comics adaptations, and I've seen a lot of fans of that recently, so I'm glad to see it, just the name come up at least.
Oh, I mean, I don't ever need to do a full-on mech series anymore, because that was basically just what if I did a mech series, right down to the super messy, confusing ending that I loved and my boyfriend did not like at all. Like, oh my God, it starts off with robots and then suddenly everybody's naked and turning into goo. This is like, I wrote it.
Yeah. So really, I want to dive into, how did Aftershock Comics come into this story? You know, with a pitch like that, what brought that publisher in and made them the right fit for this story?
I mean, I've said it before, I'm sure, on this and other podcasts, but I just love working with those guys. You know, like, they don't usually do superhero stuff, but that was the nice thing about this book. It's not really a superhero story. Like, I'll have my little Grant Morrison touches. I mean, you know, someone gets in the Patron and fights Super Mechatron, a mech warrior version of the Metatron that's out to destroy Vatican City later in the series. Couldn't help myself. That was the most granty I've been in a long time. But it's not really about superheroes. It's about these people. So I think that piqued their interest, because they do try to stay away from a solid Capes book unless there's a more humanistic touch. So that's, I think, why they went for it. But why did I go for them? Because they've just been incredibly supportive of the stories I want to tell. You know, since I went freelance, some of my most exciting stuff has been with Aftershock. They tend to be pretty decisive, they tend to be pretty exacting when it comes to what you pitch them. But what I love about them, they'll put you through the ringer in the pitch stage, which is their right to do. But then once they decide, they are all on board. If they say yes on something, they get out of the way and let you do the best damn job you can. And I've always appreciated that about them. When they say yes, it means yes. And when they say no, it means no. But, you know, as a freelancer, you get told no 100 times a week. You know, that's not unusual. But it's nice that they know what they want, and when they make the decision they put all their energy behind that. So that goes for this book. It goes for Kill a Man, which I did in the fall with them. It goes for Rainbow Bridge, which we're launching. And it also goes for the at least 2, if not more, books that aren't announced from Aftershock as I roll my eyes back into my head where I keep things written down. So yeah, I love the sort of point of view they have. They're not really afraid of breaking boundaries with storytelling. I didn't think we'd be able to do everything that we did in Kill a Man, because some of that stuff was pretty raw, no pun intended, for folks that have read the book. And they were all there for it. You know, they said, we want to publish this. Do the work you said you were going to do. Put up or shut up. And I tend to usually put up, and I have trouble shutting up. So I've always been a fan of working with them, and I hope to continue to do it. I'm sure I will. You know. Oh, and I did lie. There are 3 books unannounced yet. So there we go.
Wow. So yeah, you weren't kidding about staying there.
Well, you know, like, and the other nice thing is that a lot of stuff I'm doing there is co-writing. So not only do I, get to get ideas out that would be different than I would by myself, but I get to sort of act as a conciliary for up and coming talent, that instead of just dropping them into the deep end, I'm like, here's someone who's great, let's do our first project together. And then, now that you're a beautiful swan, you can go out and do your own stuff. And like, publishers have a good impression of you. So like, you're going to see a lot more co-writing from me there and other places, like I did with L.A. Thornhill Sanchez in Commanders in Crisis 8, for example, because I've realized after being in for a while, it's one thing to send an email recommending someone, but it's much more to ensure that initial experience that they have with the publisher and that the publisher has with them is professional, reliable, and great. So I've sort of switched over to like pitching new concepts with folks, something we can own together. and also not just dropping them in without any swimmies into the world that is comics.
Wow. That's awesome. Cody, Chad, did you guys want to jump in?
I'm saving myself for the Commanders in Crisis discussion.
Okay. All right. I see you.
And I think my questions are more like overarching for for his writing. So go ahead.
Oh, wow. Put me back on the spot. So when you're looking at it from a craft standpoint, Aftershock does, for the most part, miniseries, finite stories. How do you approach crafting a story? That is only going to go 5 or 6 issues versus something long form.
Well, the good news is I've almost never had the privilege of writing something that is long form due to the current state of the industry. So it's not so foreign to me. But joking aside, what I think about with stuff like that, it's a common adage from old screenwriting folks. Come late and leave early. And I think about that a lot with these books. And I learned that at DC too. Like if I have a great arc, you can't always afford and really shouldn't afford to be like, oh, this is going to be so amazing for issue 12 to 18. You got to go big from the beginning and deliver a lot of story calories from the beginning. And so when it comes to miniseries stuff, which by the way, some things do come back. I think it was Undone by Blood is coming back at Aftershock. Don't quote me on that because I'm just talking at my ass. But
it's back and it's amazing still.
But basically the way I approach it is to tell the biggest the biggest story possible in those 5 to 6 issues. And then it's a challenge if I have to come back, but that's a fun challenge. With all these concepts, it's like let's leave nothing on the table. And then if we have to, we can build a new table. But right now, I want to deliver as much as possible. So it's funny because Project Patron, there's a ton more I want to say with that. So I hope that it gets the Undone by Blood treatment, even if we just get an oversized special to talk a little more. But what we have to do is essentially write like that we don't have write like there's going to be no second arc because there's no guarantee, and that's really. For better or worse, the way a lot of comics are now, just because of the way the market is structured. I remember distinctly when I was a kid, the Martian Manhunter book by John Ostrander got canceled after 36 issues, and I was fucking furious. And now, I would give a year off my life to get a book that ran 36 issues.
Right?
Not a good year, maybe age 13, but still, so things have changed. So my inclination, especially since being at DC, has always been go big out the gate. And then, it's a challenge to find out how to escalate that, but that's our job. So we shouldn't be intimidated by that.
Definitely. I love that. I love kind of the approach to storytelling and also what you've done with superhero genre in general. I mean, you toy with it in a lot of fascinating ways. And we're here talking about 2 superhero books at their core. But a lot of what they talk about or deal with is identity. And that's something I found contrast in reading both of these series, Commanders in Crisis and Project Patron, is we have a superhero identity in Project Patron that's made up of a lot of different input from the people behind it, but it's channeled into a singular focus or character. And Commanders in Crisis is this huge exploration of broad identity and what it means in the superhero genre. And that's sort of an interesting thing that I tapped into while reading these and what you're doing with your storytelling beats and superheroes, and sort of a forced segue into both talking about Commanders in Crisis and Project Patron. Can you speak a little bit about that duality or that contrast between what these 2 stories offer the superhero genre?
Yeah, I think they are very different. So, but I tend to talk about identity a lot. If I have one macro theme, it's probably that in all my stuff, but with Project Patron, you are getting this very much a conspiracy and suspense action book that is about sort of the nature of secrets and truth, and really about interpersonal dynamics. Commanders in Crisis is kind of the opposite. It's a big, sprawling superhero epic that is honestly like my love letter to the Silver Age and to the books. I mean, both to the Silver Age type of storytelling where a ton happens and new characters happen every issue and it's super compressed, and to the weirdness of the 90s that I grew up in. Like we are not decompressed in Commanders in Crisis. And I think that has hurt me in some ways. Let me say, with the expectations of the hyper mainstream readership, but that's also fine. I mean, I'm not going to go to Image and do, especially out of the gate, and do something that isn't 100% me. So I'm super proud of that book. It is not told in the way that, every big event book is, but I wouldn't be myself if we weren't pushing that, It is really meant to be sort of a commentary both on the industry, but also just a love letter to old school comic storytelling with modern trappings, without the sort of simplicity when it comes to the types of casts and the types of themes that appeared in those books. But we want a lot to happen in each issue. And it's not, it's not a subtle book, but like it's meant to be satirical in a lot of ways, but also still heartfelt. I mean, I have a character named Headcanon that shoots terrible versions of the person he's fighting out of his fucking face. So when I see people be like, it could be more subtle, like, no shit, man. Like, but that's not what we're going for here. And also the world is not subtle right now, not to put too fine a point on it. So I'm incredibly proud of that book, and it's a weird one, and it's only going to get weirder. I think it's issue 9 has Dr. Dracula, the psychokinetic super taster. But I'm super proud of that. No pun intended.
Yeah, Cody, that seems like a great segue for you to join the conversation.
Oh, certainly. There's almost everything you just said is something that I literally said before this. That this has that 60s Silver Age compressed storytelling. A lot's happening, and I think that's jarring for a lot of modern fans because, since 2005 or so, we've been doing this decompressed storytelling across the mainstream medium. And I'm so excited that you said that because that was actually literally going to be my first question. But just what a fascinating concept. I love the way that this book takes a mirror, holds it up to society, in the way that good comics and specifically superhero comics are supposed to. I'm sure there's a question in here somewhere. I'm not sure where I'm going to get to it. So I want to know about the thought process in constructing the power sets for these heroes, because there's such a unique set of power sets that you don't see it very often. Like, it's no knock on Jupiter's Legacy, but I'm watching Jupiter's Legacy and it's like, oh my God, these couldn't be more stereotypical, tank, psychic, everyone can fly. Like, just...
Although, and listen, and I'm not, you won't find a lot of positives about Mark's recent work to come out of my mouth, but I will say, like, he does find some really creative uses for those relatively mainline powers in Jupiter's Legacy. So let me bunker my overall dislike of the Miller World era, which is not to say I dislike all his work. It just hasn't been for me. There's a meanness to it that isn't for me. Like, every time I give it another shot, and I should cite my work so people don't think I'm just being a jackass, But like I sit down to read something like, I think it was called Superior, and I was like, I'm going to give this a shot. I love Laniel, but it's still like just these like really like playground mentality level, like gay jokes and mocking of people with mental illness. It's all the lowest hanging fruit. And the thing about that to me is that it's not all the stuff. Like, I loved Magic Order. So while I dunk on some shit that I think is bad, let me say what I think is good as well. But all that to be said, Commanders in Crisis for me, like, it was like the original series expansion of the bug that I caught doing Milk Wars with Gerard Way. So it was never going to be people that just have super strength, because that's a book where Flex Mentallo, gave everyone orgasms by flexing too hard. And then they put that in the show. So, but I wanted to be creative. And a lot of these things are also, much like the book itself, they're homages and not even homages, but they're little ideas I had over the course of working at DC and odes to powers and characters that I think are underutilized. You know, there's a little bit of Jesse Custer in Originator. There's also a little bit of Black Bolt in Originator. Like, she can talk, but everything she says is potentially devastating. Right. And Black Bolt, I will say for folks, it's probably I don't think it's one of my favorite Kirby characters. It's one of my favorite Marvel characters. And that contradiction of him having immense power, but the immense sacrifice he makes, to me, that's what makes a good power. There's got to be, and you can see that in a lot of the things that pop up in Commanders in Crisis. Sawbones, has the natural ability, but none of the knowledge. He's not a real doctor. He has to learn medicine like anyone else, but he has the advantages of essentially being able to see inside people. Originator, we already talked about. Seer has these godlike powers, but they're so overwhelming for a human mind that you can only do it for a short period of time. Frontier is a little less conflicted, but she's an intuitive. So it's not like she always necessarily knows how she's doing the thing she does, which is, by the way, like she's Adam Strange meets Forge, for people wondering where that came from. I'm forgetting a member because it's late at night. Prize Fighter. Yeah, Prize Fighter. I mean, listen, he's reverse Gladiator, because I've always thought that. But he's a reverse Gladiator with a commentary on how obsessed a lot of the world is with like social media culture, right? And if you want to talk about unsubtle stuff, stay tuned, because there's a direct commentary on that coming up in the book. But no, yeah, he's like, to me, that's like Gladiator for 2021, where we measure things and how many followers we have and how many likes we get. And again, all of that is essentially meaningless. I can't go to CVS and get my prescriptions by saying that I have 24,000 followers on Twitter. They're like, cool, we have money. We would like money. So yeah, they all come from those places. And yeah, and a lot of it is just like, I need these things that I had to get out when I was in DC, and they wouldn't work for one reason or another. I mean, I chuckled about headcanon, but I think that shit is, it's my book, and I think it's really funny. So what are you going to do? And also just like getting a chance to do some audience participation. A lot of these are boxes I want to check now that I'm in control. So like Bourgeois Swan shows up, and Bourgeois Swan was chosen by Twitter. I mean, I made his background up myself, but I said, I want to do a King Shark type villain. And of course, of the 4 animals I picked, they picked the one least like a shark, a fucking swan. But swans are really mean. So yeah, that's in there, and there was that direct connection. Folks picked that, audience participated, and then it was in the book, which is again a thing I always wanted to do. It's no 1-800 number to kill Jason Todd, but it's about as close as we can get. Although maybe with my next book I'll do something like that. I do, but no, it's all about just the creativity and the lens that I wanted to put on both the past 6 or 7 years of my career and the past 80 years of comics. And a lot of it, almost all of it, comes from that.
I really want to tap into that a little bit and circle back a little bit to the compressed versus decompressed storytelling that's going on here and what you brought into it, because I shit you not, at 7:04 p.m. before the show started, at 7:30 p.m., we're talking about Commanders in Crisis. And Cody, I'm talking about how the execution, something's throwing me in it. It doesn't feel like a typical superhero story, and like I'm not sure what I'm picking up on. And he says, I think what you're likely keying on there is it seems to be a deliberate narrative structure that is disrupting the linear nature of superhero narrative. It's the antithesis of decompressed storytelling in a lot of ways, where someone like me who's literally been raised in the era of decompression. And I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about that method and approach to storytelling and where your influences came from that you talked about with Silver Age comics and what helped to make that into what Commanders in Crisis is today.
Well, there's 2 big influences, and one is a long time ago and one is more recent. First of all, I'm probably going to sneeze horrendously at some point because of my allergy. So I'm just going to get that apology out of the way, but I'm going to try to fight it back. So one of them is, well, it's All-Star Superman. Like when that was coming out, you could trip over an interview that Grant did where they were talking about how it was super compressed. And that is the storytelling they use on that book. It's similar. It stars just Superman, so in that respect, it's different versus being an event-style book. But at minimum, they're done in ones, if not 2-in-1s basically because of the A plot and B plot in that book. And in my opinion, that's one of my favorite books ever. You know,
As well it should be.
And it is different. You know, you could look at that book and trace out how it would be told in a decompressed way. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just different. You know, you can see, I can imagine the complaints for folks who were new to it, if the internet was then what it was now, about how, you know, there's no backstory for Atlas and Samson, you know, when they show up in issue 2 or something. And how do I know about these people? But you don't, you know, in that style of storytelling, you have everything you need. You maybe don't have everything you want, but there's a utilitarian nature where you have everything you need, and they serve their purpose. It's not like you really have to know much more about Atlas and Samson and that, because they're just there to kind of be douchebags. The character point that pivots where you do get more deeper into it is the Lois and Superman dynamic. They're essentially assets for that narrative.
Right.
And the other influence is always going to be Kirby, but in this case it's Stan and Jack Fantastic Four, where so much happens in every issue in that first 100 issues. It's unreal, and I'm envious of that. You know, I'm incredibly envious of that, and so at least with this book, I probably will work a more traditional style in future books for a while. I wanted to do that. This was after many years without being able to work at a place like Image. You know, I wanted to go out and do the type of superhero book that at least I thought was going to stand out from the crowd. And that's where the storytelling comes from, and the types of ways we look at things come from. And you know, I liked. Even things like, you know, I enjoyed the gentle ribbing of the early Image era that would happen between creators. Like, I'm pretty good friends with Tom King. I think he knows that when the character demanded to be taken seriously and they pull a 9-panel grid on the screen, like, that's just me tipping my hat to him. But it's all in good fun. You know, Tom flipped me the bird from his helicopter, made him money. He's doing all right. But no, like I from top to bottom, it is really sort of. In the way it's told, it's a wink to the past, and in the things it talks about, hopefully, it's an eye to the future, and that's what we're going for.
Phew!
Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
No. No, please, Cody. Go ahead. I would.
So yeah, speaking of this nod to the future, I kind of wanted to talk about that. When I was reading Commanders in Crisis, I got a distinct planetary vibe out of it. In the sense that what Warren was doing with Planetary, which is my all-time favorite comic, I'm very regrettable about the things that Warren Ellis did, but still my all-time favorite comic. And I got that same kind of vibe where what he was doing with pop culture and this examination of things through time, you're doing with ideologies and more like metaphysical concepts. So with this idea of the death of empathy, which is something that I think all of us, we're all US-based reviewers right here, I think we really feel that pretty hard right now. Not to spoil the book or anything, like, what do you feel personally, as far as like philosophically, where do we go from here? Like, what is the?
I think it shouldn't be as a surprise without spoiling the ending of Commanders in Crisis. It's not going to be as cut and dry as you would expect, because nothing in the book has been, and that's kind of been the point. You know, like one of the things that we love to do in comics is, like, you know, Darkseid is the god of evil, and if we kill him, people would just be good. But it's never that simple. And that's like, you know, I mean, we've already unpacked the idea that small-minded executrix is like, oh, like, you know, Earth Z is tilted towards evil. This is the Earth where evil wins. Okay, but that's like only if you have a child's understanding of good and evil. Like, there obviously is intrinsic evil, but a lot of it falls in the gray area. Do you think a gazelle doesn't think a fucking lion is evil? You know, and so a lot of what we're doing is, you know, pointing out that things are not as simple as superhero morality often thinks they are. And so, yeah, empathy is dead, but it's by design that it hasn't necessarily played out where everybody is just a completely cold asshole, because the reality is that You know, in like biological systems, for example, there's like arterial sclerosis, for example. That's not what it's called, but you know, if you have like a blockage in your heart, for example, the veins that aren't blocked will become strengthened and try to work around it. And I try to imagine that society would work that way as well with a loss of empathy. That's not even getting into the fact that folks who are on the spectrum maybe don't even engage certain concepts, and they still find obviously a way to have great lives in the absence of certain things that we take as givens for day-to-day existence. So, you know, we did this big splashy thing and everybody thought it was one thing with empathy being dead, but now we're kind of saying, well, you know, it's not as simple as we all think it is. And basically, if there is a big point to come out of the crisis, it's that these black and white distinctions and sort of cut and dry, very sort of primal takes, there's this place for them. Certainly, I fucking love the fourth world, but also it's there. Sometimes you have to look at it and say it's never that easy.
Right.
For better or worse, it's never that easy. You know, bringing empathy back wouldn't suddenly make everybody stop being assholes. And empathy dying wouldn't suddenly make everyone into a cold asshole. There's other reasons people do things. And so the ending of the book is going to be, if anybody likes the ending at all, it'll be because it is a little more philosophical. And it's me, so it is going to end up hopeful. I mean, like, Commanders in Crisis is not ashamed of superheroes at all and ashamed of hope at all. But it's going to be by design, you know, not necessarily a fist raising like everybody loves everyone ending, because that's cute, but look at the world. You know, it's never that simple.
Right. And I mean, I love the fact that you're dealing with things that on a few different levels, because you've got the death of empathy on the one hand, you know, abstract playing itself out, but then you've also got this reflection of a lot of the discourse that's happened in our nation in the last few years vis-a-vis the American Individuality Act. And
nearly impossible to write political satire because the time it's published, it's already basically what's happening.
Old news, but I think you found a way to address it that is unique and has I mean, if we're talking about the wet dreams of the far right, you know, a loose coalition of states without really a centralized government is exactly what they want and highly utopian, even though we have historically tried that and it was a colossal failure. So
I also like it's funny because, yeah, it's not a subtle commentary. It's an unsubtle commentary. But when you look at Congress, I mean, it's within the past 4 years that some idiot was holding up a snowball in Congress as evidence that global warming.
Oh, he's from my state.
So, like, are we subtle right now? You know, like, are we? Yeah. No, we're not. Like, politicians are not subtle right now. We've got Ted fucking Cruz, who is like a human Jack in the Box of hate. So, like,
he's from mixed state.
things are not subtle. But yeah, and that said, the Individuality Act is a commentary on that sort of hyper isolationism, but as well, it's also a comment on my own fear, like within the queer community of friends I have, and in a worst case scenario where they were like, oh, well, I would definitely live on an island only of gay people. That is not in any way equivalent to what folks that are acting out of hate are doing. But I do consider it for the future of the world somewhat dangerous as well. Like we can't wall ourselves off, even if it would be easier. You know, like I would like to never have to explain my existence to someone again on a base humanistic level. But look, I don't think there's a way forward with that. Although the way that wraps up may surprise you as well. So that's all I'll say.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, you've seen the hero say that they thought, like, I mean, that's a big question that the book asks, and I forget. I mean, I'm on issue 11 right now, so I'm like, haha, what is actually out? But I mean, I think at this point they have asked, you know, do we even need to bring empathy back? You know, was it so good before? Are we just trying to get back to the status quo? And if so, why? You know, and that goes for the Individuality Act too. There's really going to be a question, like they think stopping it is a big deal, but you'll see how that plays out once everything comes together. You know, again, hopefully it's not what you expect, and hopefully it's a little more shocking because, you know, if they stop the Individuality Act, it's not as though things were aces before that legislation started gaining traction. So you'll see how that develops, but it is really a lot of like, if anything, I want this to be a book that really slaughters sacred cows in a social way, and shows that, you know, if there's a message to it, it's that you have to shatter the status quo, and real hope doesn't come from going backwards. You know, sometimes dead is dead, sometimes the past is past, and you know, you can't. There's no point in honoring it. You know, like I have a nephew that I'm trying to say this in a way that doesn't like blow up my family. Well, I have a family. I have a young family member who came out, and you know, there was a question of, oh, what would his great uncle think? What would his grandfather think? What does grandfather think? Well, his grandfather passed away in 2005, so the reality is it doesn't matter. You know, what's important is that person's happiness and the world that person's living in, not fucking up the current one to pay homage to the one that is gone, like it or not. And that's not me being unromantic. It's just a fact. You can't put shackles on the present and the future because you want to honor the past. There's just no way forward. So there's a lot of questions like that in the book.
Yeah, the way forward is a big deal with the superheroes in this book. There's a moment, I think, in issue 6 or 7 where Prizefighter and Sawbones are kind of talking to each other, and they're figuring out that empathy is dead, but they still have that memory, and they still understand, you know, what they should be doing. They have the memory of what they should be doing, but they have to figure out why, and they're trying to find that basis of reasoning. And it feels like there is, like you said, there's a bit of sacrificial stuff going on here, where you're examining what drives superheroes. And is there any commentary happening there on the emotions or ideologies behind hope and empathy, and where these superheroes are deriving what pushes them forward, and what might change about that with the loss of empathy and still having to find that way forward?
I think that it, not specifically superheroes, but people in general, absolutely. You know, like, you know, I believe that conversation is not just about Prizefighter and Sawbones, but it's about how Chris, you know, Prizefighter's on again, off again guy could really care about him or have interest in him now if empathy's gone. And, you know, that the commentary there is, you know, we have, all of us could look at our interpersonal relationships with a more critical eye and see which ones are, you know, which ones are maybe not what we think they are, or, you know, maybe they are good, but not for the reasons we think. And so, you know, as we had said, empathy might be gone, but people still have other parallel urges and parallel concepts. And at its core, as they come to realize, like, hopefully at least there's this survival instinct, you know, because logic would dictate that if we all eat each other, then, you know, we're done. So at least for the people, the heroes in the Crisis Command, that is enough to get them through for the moment, at least, because, you know, if really, you know, it is dog eat dog, you know, the whole world ends up being like that fucking pit full of rats in Skyfall. And now, are we there right now? Maybe in the real world, but at least in Commanders in Crisis, that's unacceptable to people. That's maybe the most utopian thing, is that I've at least had people decide they don't want to eat each other into oblivion. And
really, that's for the best.
Yeah, no, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to do it within the next 10 years in America. We hope not.
We're trying real hard.
I mean, I am fucking tasty, but regardless. But yeah, it is like anything. Like we want to analyze the standard morality of heroes, you know, and that even goes to the fact that a big part of the Commander's way forward is to reveal the truth to the world about the multiverse and who they are, and admit that they're big time fucking failures. You know, this is the last reality, but it's also their last shot to get it right. And so I think there's a heavy pathos there. And that's
that realization
clearly showing any kink in your ego armor is a big deal for politicians right now, especially certain former presidents. So, you know, it's on my mind.
Can't imagine why. God, it's So we got a comment in there from our amiga Duna over at Mutant Watch.
I agree completely with that comment.
It's like the evolutionary justification for society and compassion. Not bad.
That is exactly what I was hoping for. I mean, compassion makes sense. That doesn't mean we always do it.
Right.
It makes sense if we're civilized thinking creatures and not animals. Like, that's the big difference for me. If this is just the savannah, then compassion doesn't make sense. Because every meal could be your last. But we're supposed to be better than that. We're supposed to be above that. And that happens. It is innate that they go to the dawn of that they go to the birth of fire, and that's what Thunder Woman says about civilization. Almost always the first to ground, but also almost never completely accepted by people.
Right.
And that's the big question. Things like compassion, things like caring for each other, protecting each other, do make sense in an evolutionary case because we want society to continue.
Right.
We want to continue to evolve. We want to become healthier. We want to live longer. We want to be smarter, in theory. But clearly that hasn't always been the way it is. So yeah, I think that by removing some of the gut checks of having compassion, yeah, we do have characters, as those folks said, essentially doing a logic proof to prove that caring makes sense, at least for thinking creatures.
Sure.
I should say sentient creatures. Obviously, animals think too, but philosophical creatures.
Yeah, absolutely. And since the big question came up, I'll follow up with one that is a little bit more dumb, because something happened in issue 8 where Thunder Woman explains to Frontier that you're trying to grasp what you're seeing with your 5 senses when actually it's attuned for 13. What do you think 13 senses are like to have?
A question I could never answer. I couldn't even imagine.
More Sony.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't have to. I think I'd get better Wi-Fi probably. That is essentially my, much with that, with a lot of things, like that is a classic Grant way to explain things, like and a Mark Waid way to explain things. I'll always remember when they shrink down in Mark Waid's guest spot on JLA, and the Atom is like, well, I got news for you. Your eyes are too small to be receiving light particles or to be breathing air. So let that fuck your mind up, but you're still here.
Yes.
13 senses. Well, outside of Wi-Fi and telepathy, I'm not sure. But we can maybe explain that in the 13D comic that we'll publish in my mind. Maybe I already published it.
Yeah, that's part of the 13 dimensions. And
I gotta read it.
You already have.
The idea of it is the comic. That's the Grant Morrison answer. So I'm just giving that all to you. Now send me $100.
Yeah. Oh no. All right. Good show, y'all.
Oh, you're sticking around another 17 minutes, Nick.
Chad, let's get you in a little bit. Chad, let's get you in a little bit. Like I said,
my question. My question was again more for you. How do you feel you've grown as a reader, because you followed your work since Undertow, and I could see, how you've grown, but how do you think you've grown as a writer, as you've not only had a little more, freedom to do what you wanted, but also learned more about the craft?
Look, I wouldn't have been slaughtering sacred cows 7 years ago because I didn't really know what I knew about a lot of things. I think what has persevered from work like Undertow is the critical lens. Even Undertow was, how can we analyze what we've taken as a given about like an Atlantean society in this case, and how can we turn it on its head, and how can we evolve it? And there's a new version of that at Commanders in Crisis. Prime Highland, my favorite version of Namor ever. He was originally going to be naked, but Tinto said he was drawing too many dicks, so that's why he got that like that kelp dick kepi or
what nonsense.
But then I had to have him put the dicks back in at the birth of man because I was like, okay, this is getting ridiculous. They're fucking, it's Homo erectus. His dick was like, get over it. But to that end, though, like Prime Highland was an evolution of the idea of from Undertow. Like it's a different flipping of expectations when it comes to that. He's that, because everybody loves to talk about how sexy Namor is. And I was like, cool. But then we combine that with undersea creatures that look one way under the ocean and then on land, globfish. So that's him. You know, like he's super sexy underwater when his body holds together, and then for him, he's just as sexy on land. You know, by Atlantean or Aquanian standards, excuse me. But for us, he's a giant weird globfish, and he looks like a melting banana on land. So that has persevered, but for better or worse, I hopefully for better. I think I know a lot more about story structure. I think I know a lot more about, you know, what the rules are, when and when to break them and when not to break them. I don't think I would have been doing a super compressed story 7 years ago. And you know, I'll go back to more traditional storytelling probably for a while after it. But as well, I think that I think my delivery style has changed. I've maybe leaned almost a little too much into exposition. There's a little bit of that DC style that I need to balance out a little more. But I'm fully aware of that. I'm trying to. But I think I've also
Commanders in Crisis needs some exposition because there's a lot happening per issue. As
well, and I did put thought balloons back in. My distaste for internal monologues has not gone away. I do really dislike them. But I'll trick them. I'll cheat them sometimes. Like I love a good conversation that starts before it meets the scene in a caption and then it meets the present. But I do not like the standard like my name's Steve Orlando, sarcastic queer Jew who writes comics. You know, like to me that is the ultimate breaking of the illusion because you on some level know that like Barry Allen can't talk to you. So I feel like on some level that always breaks the illusion for me. And I actually did more of that in Undertow, and then I became even more passionate about not liking it as time went on. And I'm sure I'll do it. You know, I'm sure I will do it. But I almost always like to at least cheat it as an in-story conversation or a journal entry, something where you feel like maybe you're spying on the action, but you're not just directly being spoken to by a character. Because outside of, you know, Frank Underwood and Deadpool, we know that that's not possible. So, I mean, and also character building. You know, almost everyone in the Commanders in Crisis team has major faults, and there's pluses and minuses to their abilities. And I think I like to think I'm much better at that than in Undertow, where I could have differentiated people more, and I could have built more classically sort of conflicted and endearing characters, which I hope I've done in Commanders in Crisis. Character, above all, I think, is what I learned at my time in DC.
Awesome. And what a great segue. I want to squeeze in a little bit of talk here since we're closing in on our hour on some Marvel news that we've got coming up. Pride Month next month. We've got some new announcements happening. Somnus, a new queer character, is happening at Marvel. There's a lot of questions on who this character is, how they're finding their role in the Marvel universe. And some people have taken into some of the wording and some of the terminology used when introducing this character that they might be trans. But I wanted to see if you could kind of clear some of that up and give us an idea of who this character is.
Sure. Well, listen, I'm always, barring NDAs about comic news, I'm always as truthful as possible with folks, even when it's maybe not the news they want to hear. So, because then you know when it is the news you want to hear, it's not bullshit. So Somnus is not trans, which is not to say that, I mean, I'm excited for more trans representation. That said, it's not something that I feel like, you know, being a cisgender bisexual guy is necessarily my lane to dig into the intrinsic experience of, and that, especially in the Pride issue. If we're going to do that, I feel like it needs to be enriched by someone who has that lived experience. And listen, I've like the receipts are there. Vita Ayala and I created the first non-binary character in DC in Supergirl 19. So I hope to be able to do more things like that again, and I hope to be able to platform more folks. L.A. Thornhill Sanchez themselves is a non-binary Black co-creator of mine who worked on Commanders in Crisis 8. So I hope to be able to do more And I hope to be able to work with those existing characters and more when they come out. But in relation to the Pride issue, I'm always going to push forward the narratives I can. I do not feel like it's my personal lane to, at least in a book that needs to center on those intrinsic experiences owned by the folks in those communities, to step out into that. So I'm going to continue to work and to support those types of narratives and support those characters as they evolve. And I've done it before. So I mean, folks know that's not bullshit. In Somnus's case, he is a gay male. But the difference for him, as you'll see in the story, is that he's sort of reborn in the present of Krakoa, but is from a previous generation. So it's a character I've never really worked with before. And it's a type of representation I haven't necessarily seen before, due to the particulars of what's going on with Krakoa and Arbor Magna and the resurrection protocols. He's essentially from the baby boomer era, and he's someone who, without spoiling the whole story, he's someone who lived a good, not tortured, a good but compromised life. But upon his passing of old age, that wasn't good enough for someone else who's prominent in the Krakoan era, and so he is resurrected in his prime with a new chance to live both as an out gay man, as an out mutant, two things he didn't do in life. So, and it's important to me not to do some suffering gay's story. He passes surrounded by family that loves him, but doesn't know his whole truth. And that's, I think, a very, it's a reflection of folks from past generations in my family. It's a reflection of folks that I live around in Boston. I happen to live by, a couple of my neighbors are in their early 70s and, came of age when they didn't have the privileges I have today. So a lot of Somnus goes into the wish fulfillment that I hope for them, for folks who were in the struggle when the struggle was a lot more dangerous than it is now, which is not to say that it's perfect now. We don't have more work to do. But I also think, especially in the context of Krakoa, where mutants especially have a fucking utopia and are essentially rule the world, that it's a unique perspective to look back on mutants from the past that are still alive long enough to at least get scanned by Cerebro and missed out. And what a moment of catharsis, especially in the Pride issue, that we get to resurrect someone and give them a second chance to live their truth and live their power. And also to give perspective to, a younger generation that I think is valuable. Someone who can both go up against people like Magneto and Professor Xavier if they ever interact. In the case of Magneto, someone who honestly probably whose actions caused Carl to stay in the closet for a while. When you see, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants attacking Cape Canaveral or whatever. So that perspective, I think, is wholly, for the most part at least, is wholly new. When it comes to a queer, an LGBTQ plus character or a mutant character. And outside of that, he's the master of dreams. And that, again, you want to talk about character building. It's a classic sort of immense power, but also a nice limiting factor. When you're awake, Somnus is essentially just a guide. But when you are asleep, he can enter your dreams and is all but a god. He's basically the Spectre. He can do whatever he wants to you. He can bend time within the dream state like happens to us when we're dreaming. He can do anything. But again, when you're awake, there is that limiting factor there. So I'm very proud. I can't wait to see him go up against other folks. You'll see who his backstory is with when the issue comes out. And I hope I get to work with him more. And also, that's not to just mention that Luciano's design is incredible. And Claudio Aguirre's work on the interiors is also incredible. And I'm just super, super excited for people to learn about that character.
Yeah, I'm super excited to dig in more here. And sorry if I'm stepping on my co-host toes here, but I really want to follow up on what you just told us about Somnus. Knowing what we know about their abilities and what they bring to the table, does Somnus offer some type of commentary on the bury your gays trope that always happens?
My personal focus with him is a generational one. It is, if anything, a commentary on at least how I was. Look, I was a young asshole in my early 20s, and I certainly was just out there to fucking party, drink, sleep around, and do whatever, and not really think about how lucky I was to even live in a moment where that was possible, where every second I did that didn't put me in danger. If anything, on the top line, he's a commentary on that, both for mutants and for the new generation of mutants and the new generation of queer folks up and coming. But that said, I'm not an idiot. I'm cognizant of barrier gaze, and that's why it's very important for me to say that he didn't, he wasn't cast out in the street. He wasn't all these things. Like, I think it's a very real story of folks in the boomer generation that it was a time where you kept your private life private, and you kept terrible secrets, and you didn't talk about things. And there's a pain there for sure. But I didn't want him to have a tortured life. The statement is not that, it was terrible. The statement was he never should have had to compromise, and for the person that knows that and is integral in his resurrection, especially someone who really only listens to themselves. So when he finds out that Somnus has passed away, he just can't fucking stand for that. And that's the line. Carl had a good life, but he never should have. He could have had a better one. No, that's not the line, because that's just fucking Max Lord from Wonder Woman 1984. I think it's Carl. He compromised, but he never should have had to. And that's the reality. So yeah, I don't want it to be he was killed in a hate crime like fucking Jack Twist, and then he came back. Like it is a nuanced point that we can have good, but still imperfect lives, and we still deserve better. And I think that that's important, and that is the message with him.
I think that's an incredibly powerful message, and thank you for putting it out there into the world and sharing it. And the more stories like this that are shared and told, the richer everyone is for getting to share someone else's experience a little bit in that way. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for, really all of your continuous and ongoing efforts towards representation in your stories. It's important.
It's important for sure. And if anything, I just try, Somnus is a multi-layered character.
Sure.
I try to... it's easy to fall into tokenism, and so I'm always conscious. Being gay is not the only thing people will know about Somnus.
Right.
Because look, that's not, being bisexual is not the whole of my identity. I think the only person who is just gay is Joey J from Drag Race, and that's I spent 7 years being like, we're not just our sexuality. Then he comes out there and he's like, did you know that I'm gay? Joey J is gay. And I'm just like, thank you. You're killing me, man. It's like you're my boggart. I appreciate all that. And I hope that that's the case with Somnus. I try to do that with characters. I think he is probably my favorite original creation, along with Firebrand, I'd point out, from DC, a character that I would love to work more. There's never been a more Steve Orlando character that someone has to get in a fight every 24 hours or they fucking die. That's just saying. But with all that said, thank you. And I hope to, the key is I hope to have time to further enrich him. And yeah, we are in life, not just one thing. The goal is to both put forward representation and show that, we are multifaceted folks, just like everybody is,
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, we're basically at our hour. So Steve, thank you so much for coming back on the show, hanging out with us a little bit. I'm sure we'll do it again, because now there's a precedent. Aha. So until next time, folks.
I'd love to hear more about his young adult thing with Seismic, the Rainbow Bridge.
Book me in August with Steve Fox, and we can talk about that.
There you go. All right.
It'll be out. Actually, there will be
on it.
Book me with Fox, and we'll talk about, at that point, not only Rainbow Bridge, which has the title announced, but we will talk about our polar opposite, 180 that, which is going to be out in the fall and will also be announced by then. So two 2 books by the Steves, and we'll gladly talk about them. Please have us on.
I think we can make that happen, Steve.
This is 4, by the way. And it's Richard Nixon, but I really meant 2. So.
Well, all right, folks, we are out of time. Thank you to our guest, Steve Orlando. Buy Commanders in Crisis, buy Project Patron, buy any comic with his name on it, because it's going to be worth your time.
Buy Magneto and the Mutant Force, because I may never write X-Men again. So get on it.
There you go. Those comics are out now. Support your local comic store. Read something awesome, and above all, be kind to one another. I will not be here next week, as I will be recovering from a shoulder surgery. So it is all Nick next week, but it's not all Nick, because guess what? Scoop Johnson is making his mighty triumphant return. You heard it here first. He's booked in. It's just, sorry, Scoop. But thank you all so much, and we'll catch you next time.